Hello and welcome to this special recording of a creative, critical, informative and we hope inspiring conversation filmed here in the Hamlin Gallery in St Hugh's College, Oxford. I'm Professor Wes Williams. I'm the Director of Torch, the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities. Today's film forms part of a series of conversations, a series of events that we have curated over the last 2 years as part of the Humanities Cultural Programme. In each conversation, we pair a practicing artist, in the broadest sense of the term, with an academic from the Humanities Division here in the University of Oxford. The hope is that through these conversations, both the practitioners themselves and the academics, and then the wider audience, might learn something about the craft of research as of artistic practice, and also something about the critical value of cultural work in today's world. I'm enormously grateful to Tom Kuhn, Professor of 20th-Century German Literature and Fellow of St Hugh's, a scholar, a translator and a teacher extraordinaire, for suggesting that we make this event part of the Humanities Cultural Programme today. And most of all, I want to express our collective thanks to Zoe Beloff, whom Tom will introduce in more detail, for her extraordinary work, represented here today by Parade of the Old New, and for her willingness to join in this project. We are proud beyond words then to be able to release this as part of the Humanities Cultural Programme Spring and Summer Season, Innovation, Provocation, Transnational Avant-Gardes. Over to you, Tom.
My name's Tom Kuhn and I'm a fellow in German here at St Hugh's College. I have to introduce myself first, but my real function is to introduce Zoe. Zoe Beloff is a New York-based artist and filmmaker. She teaches at City University in New York. And she's here in St Hugh's and in Oxford with her work, which is on the walls around us here in the Hamlin Gallery, the Parade of the Old New, which we hung here yesterday. Something I always want to ask people is, how did you decide to do this? How did this start?
January 2017, the inauguration of Trump. And I, like many other people, started to paint, to go out on protests, marches, and I started to paint these big signs to take on marches on corrugated cardboard. And, we actually went to the inauguration with big, colorful signs. I really believe that protests should be festive and loud and capture people's attention. However, each time I would paint one, I'd feel like the canvas was not big enough. It was not big enough to express my rage. And so I realized I needed a bigger canvas. And kind of on a whim, I did something that I'd never thought I would do, which was begin to paint a history painting. And so I bought 3 sheets of large corrugated cardboard, just kind of like what you get for packaging or whatever. It was like 1 meter by 1.5 meters, and I put them together in my studio and I started to paint this picture. I was clear from day one that it was going to be the Parade of the Old New, because I felt like when Trump was elected, we were all so devastated, and I felt like at that moment, Brecht would have something to say about that moment. I didn't know how to put this into words, but I felt like he would. And actually the very first thing I did the day that he won the election, we realized what happened, was I went to his poems and was reading them, and that poem really stood out to me, and I put it on social media, and I said, I think it's time for this poem. And the beginning of the poem talks about this leader who kind of, with his henchmen, marches to the Capitol, and he brings the most foul and disgusting old ideas and projects them as the new. And I felt like this is what America First was, and it really spoke to that. And so that was definitely going to be my task. So that and the painting which starts with the triumphal procession to the Capitol, was how it began. But yeah, I just needed a bigger canvas. I had no sense that it was going to become this huge work that I did over years, and I had no way of knowing what would happen.
So you started with one panel, with the first panel.
With the first panel we see here, which is actually 3 large pieces of cardboard put together.
We should explain that the original work is much bigger than this. These are digital prints, and the original work it's about 5 foot high.
Yes.
And now I have to switch to meters.
Yes, 40 meters long.
I remember it in meters and 40 meters long. And we don't have space for that. So it is a huge work. And that sort of monumental scale was not, well, that you were painting on panels, that scale was part of it from the start, but you had no idea that it was going to go on for such a long
time. No, because I had no idea what was going to happen. I mean, I painted it as the scenes that you'll see unfolded, so it's kind of in real time. It was painted in real time.
Yeah.
And actually, even at the end, I thought I'd finished, and I hadn't. And that was the weirdest thing, because I realized after a period of time, I realized when Trump
failed to be re-elected.
Yeah, failed to be re-elected, then my project would end. And so the second to last panel you see here is young people painting the words Black Lives Matter on the road, which happened during the George Floyd protests, and they were incredibly beautiful, grand works of public art. And I loved them, and they were the very fact that people were with work, kind of rolling out the future. I thought was actually a very beautiful way to end, a new direction. The parade turns in a new direction. So I thought that was going to be the end, and I thought I'd finished. And then January 6th happened, and I was like, shit, oh no, I have to go and buy more cardboard. So yeah, it was wild, and it was unpredictable. And I mean, obviously I didn't paint it continuously. Those long periods in between sections. But yeah, so as I say, the painting, that's why it took 4 years.
There are so many things you've already said that I want to pick up on.
Right.
But anger. One of the things I really admire about this is that it's so furious, and I'm a student of literature, and anger is difficult in literature, and anger is difficult in art as well, in visual art, isn't it? Because it's something which flares up, and here it's something that you somehow have to make continuous. Was that something that you were sort of aware of?
That's an interesting question, because it's not so simple. And I actually think Brecht is a good model, because he was very angry and he writes some bitter poems, but it's not crazy anger. It's still very thoughtful, and when you read these poems, they're also beautiful poems. And he thought about that issue, and that's like in his poem To Those Who Come After, he talks about how we couldn't be friendly, and he really thinks about that, and it's really, really moving. And I didn't want to make anger is I'm not sure it's a productive, helpful, and it's a horrible place to be. So there were it's not like anger you see in Goya or something like that. It's not monstrous in that way. In some ways, it's actually painted in a calm way. I mean, it's not, and it's also very colorful. And again, I think protest should be festive. I want it to celebrate our protests, not just to be bitter.
No,
and so those things, they're at once monstrous, yet humorous. I mean, I think humor is a really good really interesting lead in to protest. Like, you want to join us because we are not bitter and mean and angry, but because we are festive and wonderful and crazy, you know, all those things.
Yeah, no, that's one of the other things I was going to ask about, but you've really answered already, was about colour, because you've chosen a sort of poster paint palette, which is very bright and yeah, joyous.
Yes, exactly. It is joyous. It's not like somber. I mean, another artist could have made, I could imagine making something that's very somber and dark, as often paintings of the horrors of war are. And I chose to go in a completely different direction. I wanted to make, yeah, I think that kind of, I don't know, for me, the horrors of war kind of work did not feel right. It almost feels too easy to fall into that. And then you're just left with like, what can be do? It's all kind of destroyed.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas I wanted to do something else. As I say, I wanted it to be available and interesting to everybody, and even children, you know? So to capture people's imagination. I mean, my protest posters are like that as well. And one thing I will say for them, and I think that's why they were successful, is like everybody wanted a cell phone picture with them when I'd go on a protest. They were like a cell phone magnet.
That's a success.
And, you know, and then they put those on social media and it kind of spreads and it goes out. And so that's what I mean by a festive protest.
Yeah, no, that's very, very good. I hadn't really seen it like that, but it's true, of course, that it's always the colourful and jokey placards that are the ones that get reproduced all the time and actually make the message much better. You've talked already about Brecht, which of course explains why it's me who's having this conversation with you. And now you mention appealing to children and the idea of children's illustration almost. But there are other traditions and influences in the background to this, aren't there? Would you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. Because actually, I had plenty of time to think about it. And I have studied art. But actually, when I talk about children, it's because, for example, I have characters that are humans as animals. I mean, that also delves into the world of like myth and fairy tale. And children's stories can be super dark and totally terrifying. And it taps a little bit into, I mean, intentionally into that world. So I never wanted to paint it totally realistically. I thought of it in my own way as an allegory, just the way Brecht's poem is an allegory. And the first, I think, initially, and I think I was right, I conceptualized it. What sprung to mind was there's a fresco in the town hall of Siena called The Allegory of Good and Bad Government by, I think the artist called Ambrogio Lorenzetti. And I have seen that. And I saw it when I was a teenager and it really stuck with me. This all around the town hall. And so to me, I was going to make an allegory of bad government. Right. And in his allegory of bad government, there were a kind of half-human monsters. And the king of the allegory of bad government is like, he has monstrous horns and really bad teeth. and I thought I would make the modern cardboard version of that. So that was kind of initial inspiration for the idea of the allegory of bad government.
Yeah.
But also, you know, I was thinking a lot when I was doing the protest posters and so on, obviously I was looking at John Hartfield. And he also did things with humans as animals. He did, Eisenstein and Strike did. So I'm always looking to these guys in the first half of the 20th century who are many people, for some reason, I gravitate to that place and that time period.
It's really, I want to come back to that time period in a moment, but it's really interesting that what you say about the allegorical procession, because the first thing that came to my mind when I saw it was Shelley's Mask of Anarchy, because the whole thing isn't painted as a procession, but because of its length, it sort of is a procession all the same. And he has this allegorical procession. I met murder on my way. He had a face like Castlereagh. And you give the faces of the politicians to some of these animals as well. So that was one, this idea of a mask, of a procession. And the other was actually the Bruegel painting of the contest of Lent and Carnival.
I didn't know that.
Because at the beginning you have Trump being dragged on his sort of trolley.
Right.
on his throne.
Golden throne,
On his golden throne on a trolley.
Yeah.
And that reminded me just a little bit. So there's a sort of history of these, of masks, of pageants and anti-pageants.
Yes.
And this
It is very much like in the spirit of the pageant. Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's kind of like a pageant. Actually, I was Trump on his golden throne being dragged. I was thinking about, that scene in A Chant Andalou where this man finds himself dragging, and it's like a grand piano and dead donkeys and two priests, I think it is.
I haven't thought of that at all, but yeah.
But with that kind of dragging.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. And so there's obviously a big connection then with the first half of the 20th century. Not only Brecht, not only the art but also the politics, presumably. We're sitting now in front of a swastika flag, amongst other things.
A Confederate flag.
And a Confederate
hand
flag.
in hand as they go in America. I mean, I did not make that up, but they go together, like guns and ammunition.
Yep. So this is actually referring us back to the 1930s is part of the analysis of what's going on in the rise of the right, the fascist right in America.
Exactly. I mean, it comes out of America First was a movement around 1940 that was the far right. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, no, and there was a Nazi sympathizing movement, and
there was a lot of just not even sympathy, Nazis.
Charles Lindbergh, and all the parades that they.
Did you see the Plot Against America?
I did, yes.
I remember. I actually never read the book, but I saw the miniseries, which I actually thought was pretty great.
Yeah, no, I did read the book as well, and it's a chilling account of how close, in a way.
I remember, I watched that, and it was interesting because I sat there at the end and I would just be in like floods of tears. And my husband, who's not Jewish, just sat there and watched it as a story. But to me, it was absolutely, because I come from that background, and my grandparents and my mother were refugees from Nazi Germany. So to me, it was absolutely real. It was totally believable. And I think, it made me really realize viscerally how, like, our past, like, we have different histories, and our histories really color how we see the world and who we are.
And there are moments that you encounter like that in the political day-to-day, but also in the representations of it in art, which make you think, or make me think, and I guess from what you've said, you as well, where would I go? Where,
Yeah.
you know, I
Yeah.
find myself dreaming or half dreaming and thinking, well, would I go up to the east coast of Scotland
Yeah.
and try and get a fishing boat
Yeah.
to take me across to Scandinavia? How do we? We're on an island. How do we
Right.
get away if something like this happens? And yeah, the Trump years presumably brought that home to people living in the States with that sort of immediacy. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go?
For middle class people like me, you know, it was not so difficult, but I worried so much about my students. I have undocumented students or students with undocumented parents, and literally people were being ripped out of their homes in Queens where I teach, you know, because they maybe lived here for decades, but they were undocumented. And that was very real to me. And it was, you know, I mean, I certainly felt my privilege as a white person. It was just it was a very strange time. I also became a detention center visitor for undocumented people. But it's actually a hideous private prison is what those were. Yeah. And I mean, they still exist, although nowadays people aren't being ripped from their homes the way they were under Trump. And we would visit this. I was with a group of Jewish women. We used to go just to be visited, just so people who had no visitors would have somebody to talk to. And at least it was a moral gesture. And sometimes we could actually help them in small practical ways and give them money so they could call their families.
But you help them also by the human contact.
Right.
Otherwise, they
But I mean, we would mostly visit people from Africa because they had no other visitors. But we'd see whole families there who would come to visit their dad, you know, and with little kids and stuff like that. And that was just heartbreaking. So yeah, it was real damage and it was really done.
That also brings us back to an aspect of the parade, and that is that not all of them, but a lot of the victims are so-called racial minorities, racial majorities, are black and Asian. How does it feel as a white person painting those racial tensions?
I think it's important that painters do that. I don't feel comfortable just painting white people. Like really? That would be weird. I mean, I feel like I grew up in Scotland where everybody's white, and I never felt very comfortable there. So I live in a really multicultural city with multicultural friends and students, and they're the people around me. And I feel to me, it's just painting the people around me and in my world. And I just think they should be shown, they should be seen, you know, and it's really, really important. And I thought that, you know, so I really wanted to make sure that George Floyd protests were recognized. And it really, the piece starts out like a kind of an overview, and I'd say the politicians and so on. But then it got, in the last part, it really changed. I took about a year and a half break from it. I was doing other things. And then it comes back to the time of COVID. You'll see there's an ambulance and the nurses and people lining up for food. And that became something that, it wasn't out there, it was something that was right in front of my house. Like it was actually, some of that was painted from phone photographs that I took, and I really felt like the working people and the people in my own neighborhood needed to be recognized in this. And actually it spawned the new project that I'm working on right now, which is about the working people. Both we're interviewing people and I'm painting them for posters. And I'm planning a mural as well. And it's called, again, kind of as a homage to Brecht, the Song of the Essential Worker. And I wish, that the Eisler was around and he would write the Song of the Essential Worker. He would totally do that.
Absolutely.
But since he's not around, I had a different idea. For each of our portrait films that we're making, I asked the worker to tell me a song or a piece of music that inspired them and they really enjoyed listening to and spoke to them. And it was great. Everybody did. They texted me back, everybody had their song. And they're all different. They're kind of wonderful. We incorporate pieces of them into each of the portrait films.
It's true that the panorama also, it sort of becomes more democratic and obviously more hopeful as well as we get to the end. Not obviously the COVID scenes, but
people helping each other.
Exactly.
And people protesting in a really positive way.
It ends then with Amanda Gorman,
Right.
which was a rather extraordinary moment at Biden's inauguration. And you've left quite a lot of empty space in front of her. Was that a sort of intentional aesthetic gesture as well?
Yes, because that's the future and we don't know what it is. And at least at that moment, I had no idea. Yeah. And so I wanted it to be open.
Yeah. It struck me hanging it here. Obviously, I had thought of it and you conceived of it as a long work. And in Augsburg, you said it was actually portrayed full 40 meters in one stretch. Here we have it going round, which is slightly strange in some ways, but it does mean that that moment confronts the moment of Trump's inauguration head on. Which I quite like in some ways. And I noticed that you put, when you started painting it, you have Trump going off to the left, whereas the rest of the panorama goes off to the right, obviously, which has the effect of, I don't know, of him, departing into the past, into the obscurity.
Really. I hope. I have to say something about the beginning, just because we're Oxford Centre of Higher Learning. Yeah. I just am going to make a remark that was on my mind. The people who are dragging Trump right at the front is a member of the Ku Klux Klan, which at the time I thought of like the ghost of the Klan. But now I just say it's a Klan, off to Charlottesville, just the Klan. And Richard Spencer, who was a leader of the white supremacy movement at that time, dressed as a Hitler Youth. And I don't know if people know this, but Richard Spencer got his master's degree from the University of Chicago and went on to do a PhD at Duke University. And so if you think that learning makes you a better, more human person, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I was appalled, but, if people often just kind of cast racism off as the white working class, and I think that's a way oversimplification.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we know that the educated vote less proportionately for Trump or for Johnson, for that matter. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And if we go back to the 1930s, let's not go too literally back to the 1930s, the universities fell into line with Nazism with alacrity and enthusiasm and invented Nazi versions of their subjects, one after the other. So.
Apparently he wrote his thesis on a doorknow. I can only, whoa, what happened?
Yeah, no, that is extraordinary. So rather than ending on the bleak note of how awful academics are, which is obviously a salutary lesson for us all, let's go back to the work and the materiality of the work as well. It's painted on cardboard. Tell us why you chose to paint on cardboard.
Yeah, I felt very strongly that it should be painted on cardboard, not like your fancy pants, fine art canvas. And that's because to me, cardboard speaks of the 21st century. It's like not only do protest posters be made out of cardboard, but cardboard is like the medium of global trade, like, and online shopping, and it is the ubiquitous medium that circles the globe. And it's just a humble medium. It's also the medium of last resort. Like, if you are homeless and you have nothing, you sleep in a cardboard box. I mean, and so I think all those things come with cardboard, and it's also very light. I mean, what was nice when we showed it, I mean, its entirety in Augsburg was the cardboard was hung. It wasn't against a wall, so it's very light. It's very light. You know, it can be packed up. It can be traveled anywhere. It does not, as I say, come with the kind of fine art connotations of canvas. Although I'm currently using canvas, but like fairground banners, you know, those kind of,
I know,
which is none of your gilt frames. So yeah, I think that's it. I love it. It's kind of beautiful. If like, it's actually a very beautiful color, and it's a beautiful ground.
I love the way actually the digital prints are so good that, I mean, if we look at that little bit there underneath the feet of the nurse, you could see that it's still cardboard, even though this is a photograph of cardboard, as it were. So the medium, not just the paints, but also the ground on which it's painted is, of the people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, but I also think, that it's more than anything for me, it's a record of a time. It was a way of keeping a record of what happened in that time, that kind of, instead of like the 24-hour news cycle, I felt like somebody, however humble a way, should keep a record of that time. And like, to me, what I wanted most was it would end up in an archive. Right. To me, that's where it really belongs, and people could look at it at a later time and see that was that time. Yeah. I kind of doubt that will happen, unfortunately, but partly it exists as a book now, and so that's also a way of keeping that record.
We should pick up the book, because this is a wonderful, I think this is a really beautiful publication. They've done it so well. So this is the parade of the old new, and it's done as a concertina book. So we have the full extent of the work contained in the book, and on the reverse then an essay on history painting or history pictures by Zoe. Thinking about it though as a panorama on the walls and as a panorama in the round as it is here, I don't know if you know, but there was a fashion for historical paintings that were room filling and round, and Brecht liked them. And they were fairground. They were exhibited in fairgrounds, so they weren't considered to be high art.
Those kind of panoramas,
high art at all.
Yes.
And he actually contemplated writing something based on one that he'd seen, which was called The Flight of Charles the Brave, it would be in English, sorry, The Flight of Charles the Brave at the Battle of Merton, which I haven't found. I don't think it exists any longer. It was probably just a popular piece for one of these occasions, but it was clearly all around, and the function of that, or the idea of that, was that you were immersed in the situation, and you sort of experienced the battle from within. Whereas yours is a much more distanced eye, and when you sit in the middle of it here, it still has that, well, I know we're still living with a lot of this, but it does have that quality of historicisation, Brecht would call it, of something that we can overcome, that there are alternatives and things like that. Is that how you see that as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very interested in the way he thought about staging history. That's what this is. It's a staging. It's done with painting rather than with live actors. But yeah, this idea of staging and the set and how that speaks, and yeah, I think he has a lot to teach artists or to help to think with. And I'm always disappointed by how disciplines are so cut off from each other. So like art people know nothing about literature and vice versa. It's like, wow, it's terrible. I mean, he didn't paint, but it doesn't mean that his ideas aren't. I mean, staging is staging, and you can do it in many different mediums.
Yeah, no, in a sense, he
And
was
that's
also
why-
a visual artist.
Yeah. In my book, I talk about his ideas quite a lot, and his own visual history work,
The War Primer.
the War Primer, yeah, which I think is fantastic. And each picture is the way he interrogates it, and it's a little dialogue. So it's like a little stage scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And there also, he doesn't focus on, some people quite wrongly describe that as giving us images of the horrors of war. There are some horrible pictures, but they're set alongside ones which aren't horrible at all. I mean, there's even the picture of the sexy carrot. I don't know
Yes,
if you remember
yes, I
that
do.
one, which
I do
is
know
a
the sexy carrot,
which is grown with two legs, as it were. So he's looking at all sorts of forms of representation rather than simply reflecting what is nasty about the war, which is everybody knows perhaps. Well, maybe we should stop there, back to Brecht and the conversations between literature and the visual arts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.